Good afternoon and welcome to our 5307, 5339 bus and bus facilities presentation. The purpose of the webinar is to kind of explain the funding that's available for 5307 small urban and 5339 bus and bus facilities, two grants that we have in Arizona here. And I am joined by my colleagues, Shatan Reed and Jesse Zaragoza, and all three of us are 5311 program managers. We go ahead and move to the next slide here. A bit of a program overview. So we have two pools of funding that we are speaking on today. First is the 5307 Urbanized Area Formula funding. And this is allocated by the FTA to small urban communities, which, Flagstaff, Sierra Vista, Bullhead, City Maricopa, and others. And they, decide whether or not they want to obligate those funds. And if not, those are returned to a pool. Secondly, we have our bus and bus facilities or 5339 program that is apportioned by the FTA for the state of Arizona. And then there are two separate pools of funding in that grant there. We have small urban 5339 and statewide 5339, which is available to rural subrecipients. And this funding is competitive, of course. It goes through our panel review process. It's a competitive grant, and it is for vehicles, bus facilities, construction projects, those sorts of things. We can go ahead and move on. All right, so a bit of eligibility here. Section 5307 and 5339 are limited to existing small urban designated UZAs. And the direct subrecipient must apply. So this is for our small urban agencies here. Section 5339 statewide, again, is open to small urban and rural transit providers. Rural 5311 can only apply for that statewide 5339. On applications, there's a limit of 1 per agency and 3 projects per recipient. And then we can go ahead and move on. This is a table of the funding we have available for this grant application. On the 5307 side, we've got 4.7 million. 5339 small urban specific, we have just over 1.1 million there. And then for 5339 statewide, including rural, we have 7.6 million for a total of about $13.5 million. And then we can move on to our next slide here, just some bits of information that we wanted to highlight. In eGrants, if you have previously applied, please select carry forward to populate some of the common information from previous year's applications. This will save you a couple hours of, tracking information down. Contact info will automatically carry forward. And then, of course, please update all information for your agency and add your unique entity identifier or your UEI number, which is found at sam.gov. Go ahead and move on, and I will pass it on to Jesse to speak on match ratios.
Thanks, Luke. Good afternoon, everyone. So we'll be going over match ratio. So please note that the match ratio will default to 80-20. But if you would like to request a higher match ratio for an ADA project, such as an ADA-equipped vehicle or an ADA facility, you must justify the ADA portion of the facility project if you would like the higher match ratio. And if you're asking for a non-ADA vehicle, please make sure to provide an equivalent service form. Next, we're looking at the state of good repair page, which has questions where you explain how this project supports the state of good repair. Specifically for your fleet and program. We have added a section to provide information on vehicle replacements. And this is not a current fleet question, but is only for vehicle purchases being requested. This will assist the panel in evaluating the requests and also assist ADOT in requesting the vehicles from FTA. And please include the mileage of the vehicles being replaced in the box above. So next, milestones. So due to the nature of this program, project readiness is an important page. Please explain here how quickly your project will be ready to go, providing milestones as a requirement. And if you're purchasing vehicles from the state contract, we can provide you information on the appropriate milestones to include. And lastly, just please make sure to be realistic with your dates on this page. Next, we'll talk a little bit about NEPA. Which is the National Environmental Policy Act. Specifically, we're going to talk about here about new bus stops, bus shelters, and transit facilities. They must have maps included in the application, documenting the proposed locations. And vehicle build sheets must also be included in the application, showing the anticipated cost for the vehicles or vehicles being requested. And vehicles and passenger shelters and existing right-of-way would generally fall under a CE, also known as a categorical exclusion for FTA. So continuing on that, facility projects need a documented NEPA process. If you have not completed the NEPA, then we will not fund construction of a project as the next step. After NEPA is the design phase, and generally FTA will not allow us to request construction funding until a NEPA is approved. So we strongly encourage phasing of projects in your request. Next, ADOT and FTA strongly suggest that coordination meetings have been held with your funding agency prior to applying for funds. For 5307 small urban applications, coordination meetings should be held with FTA. For 5311 rural public transit subrecipients of ADOT, coordination meetings should be held with ADOT and FTA. And applicants should also include letters of support and documentation of the source of local match funding. And awards will only be made to projects that are ready to proceed, and all required project information and environmental documents have been provided / completed. And lastly, if you just want to know a little bit more about NEPA and want to get more familiar with it, NTI does have a course which you can take, which does cover some of the basics of NEPA. So with that, I pass it over to Shaitan.
Thank you, Jesse. So next, we're going to touch on supporting documentation and financial readiness. It is extremely important that with your application, you provide supporting documentation that demonstrates your readiness to proceed with this project at this time. One of the common projects that is requested in this application is for buses. And for buses, we need your build sheet reflecting the final pricing. However, you should anticipate a price increase. So that should be calculated into the amount that you request for that project. Please also note that if there is a price increase, the subrecipient will be required to cover that increase with local match. ADOT will not have the funding to cover price increases. Only the amount awarded to subrecipients will be given. Next slide, please. Local match. Previously in this section, we required a letter from your CFO confirming that you had the funding available needed for the project. However, because we realize all of our agencies are structured differently, we are now just asking for a letter from the highest authorized official committing to the local match that is needed. That can be provided in a letter or a resolution. And also with local match, we want to make sure that you all identify the source of your local match. FTA does not like the term general fund. So if you could be as specific as possible and provide us examples such as sales tax or property tax, that would be great. Next slide, please. For our recipients who are direct to FTA, we will provide a transfer letter to you all that can be submitted with the application you submit in TRAMS. We ask that all direct recipients apply to FTA for funding that they were awarded within 6 months of the award, and that the funding is obligated within 12 months of the award. Next slide. Here we're going to just discuss the application evaluation. This slide shows you the evaluation criteria. A panel reviews all applications and ranks them by criteria listed in this slide as well as in the NOFA. ADOT is required by FTA to also consider geographic distribution and Title VI criteria to ensure that funding is awarded equitably. We strongly encourage you to respond to all questions in the application, including letters of support. Next slide. Construction projects. For construction projects, we look at site selection and your environmental justice analysis provided. We also consider if the applicant discussed the project requirements with ADOT and FTA. We also look at if design has occurred during NEPA that it did not exceed the 30% design mark until NEPA was complete and approved. Next slide. Thank you. So then this is just also reiterating the fact that your NEPA needs to be completed for the approved site and that it has to be approved by ADOT and FTA. We also want to make sure that you're providing any documentation that explains any socioeconomic impacts on the community surrounding the construction site. For vehicle requests, ADOT verifies that a build sheet is provided. So again, we just want to make sure that you get a quote from the vendor with current pricing and that build sheet is included in your application. For bus shelters, we would ask that you include maps reflecting where any new or existing structures are located. Next, we're just going to touch on some important information. All awardees are required to comply with FTA and ADOT requirements. Awardees which are not direct recipients of FTA will have the award added to their existing ADOT contract, which is your Exhibit A. And you will continue to reimburse through e-grants for the funding you were awarded. For direct recipients, you will be given a transfer letter to include in trams with your application. Awardees must be able to provide a local match, which is generally 20% for capital projects. And I'll hand it back to Luke.
All right. Hello, everyone. We're going to briefly go over some questions that were asked so far in the application cycle here, and also some that were asked in last year's cycle that were still, relevant and useful for us to learn. Okay, so are we able to request buses that are nearing the end of their life cycle for replacement? And sometimes, yes. Generally, the FTA, if it will reach its useful life within 1 year of the application, then they will, be able to accept that. But in that event, you will need to document how the vehicle will meet that useful life. So if it's 150,000 and it needs to reach 200,000, say, okay, in the next 5 months, we'll get, 10,000 miles a month, and we'll reach it. Something like that, for example. So does ADOT have a form applicants can fill out for verification of local match? No. As was mentioned earlier, we need written documentation on an agency letterhead signed by a designated signatory. Does the review panel consider agencies who guarantee a local match above 20% as more favorable? And no, there is no benefit to increasing your local match availability there. And then is there a minimum grant request? Generally, we will not consider funding capital projects below $5,000 because that is the FTA threshold for capital purchases. We can move on. We've got a long one here that I'll abbreviate. It's my understanding that NEPA was not required for replacement bus shelters because they are installed at a current shelter location on an existing concrete pad and there is no ground disturbance. However, their NEPA compliance is required on all projects funded with federal dollars. So you'll need to go through that process for all projects that are relevant. We can go ahead and move on to our final page of questions here. So is in-kind eligible for local match? In-kind is very limited in 5339 funding. It can only be used for services donated by a consultant or vendor, however. And then this next question, can we put multiple buses on one project? And yes, you can combine up to 3 vehicles that are the same make, model, and size into one project. And then will there be a cure period to correct any issues? And the short answer is no. Application is due August 29th. And if there is another global IT outage, we are able to extend the due date as that will affect all applicants, right? And then at the bottom of the page here, this website will lead you to the page that we use to share all of this information, including the FAQ sheet, the NOFA, this webinar, as well as the slides. Then we can go ahead and move on to the next slide here. And yep, again, our application is closing August 29th, the end of the next month here at 3 p.m. Apply through eGrants. If you have any questions, please send them, ideally at a minimum a week before the application closes so that we can ensure that it gets posted. If you ask after August 29th, we'll say, then we can't guarantee that it will be posted to the FAQ and shared in time because, there are IT processes in the back end here. So ask questions early. Get started on your application early. And then at that, do we have any questions to share? You can drop them in the chat. You can raise your hand, and we will go through them now. Go ahead, Todd.
Sure. Just a real quick kind of administrative thing. I'm seeing online, it still shows that 22nd due date. There's some individuals I want to send this along to. Do you have any idea when that website will just be updated with the most recent NOFA and due date info?
Yes. So I submitted a request for that first thing yesterday morning. And because our IT staff has experienced, those IT outages, I don't have a clear estimate of when that will be posted, but I did send the document to everyone. So you have that exact file
Okay.
You got it over email and I also attached the FAQ that has, the most recent version of that. And I did submit it. I don't have an estimate of when it will be up, but everyone should have it. Feel free to, forward that to others. If you didn't get it, shoot me an email and I'll make sure we get it to you. Go ahead, Shatan.
I just want to reiterate to everyone, Luke mentioned that you have the option to carry forward information in the application. Please look at the information before you carry it forward. You don't want to carry forward old or inaccurate information. So if there's been changes in staff, please update that. Anything that may have changed from a previous application cycle, you just want to make sure that that application is current.
Go ahead, Diane.
Hi there. I was checking the settings and I don't see that the settings are there for them to be able to copy forward. Has anybody been able to successfully copy forward? Because I don't think the settings are there to be able to do that. I don't see it on the rollover that Agate did that. So I don't think they're getting the option to do that, unfortunately.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for sharing, Diane. That is unfortunate, and I apologize for everyone having to type that information in.
Oh, it's luckily it's not too much. It's only a little bit. It's only, I think there were 2 forms that were allowed before, and it's not a lot of information. So I think we're good. I think some changes might have been made to some of the forms. So and then they requested that we turn it off, and then time went by and it never got turned back on again. But I think you guys are good, but there is no copy forward at this time.
Okay.
Thank you, Diane. Luke, Lisa Robertson had a question. She asked, they are 5311 applying for buses with different makes and models. How should this be handled? And so I believe if they're different makes and models and sizes, they're going to be all separate projects.
I agree with that. And if you have any questions about that, Lisa, feel free to reach out. We can clarify that because I'm sure you're not alone. All right. Any other questions?
Is ITS available, eligible under 5339?
One more time, you cut out for a second there.
Is ITS available under 5339, eligible under 5339 software?
ITS. I believe yes, but here we'll write that down and we'll get information back to you here. But I believe that's a yes.
If you guys don't mind if I chime in, I was gonna say, for, I believe, Luke, I believe that you are correct. It is, software is eligible. However, it should not be like a subscription. It's like a one-time, expense. So
Mhm.
to clarify that.
That's
Got-
like a license.
Ongoing license, would that be better housed in the in the 5311
Yes.
application?
Right.
Okay, that's
Right.
I just wrote the last 5339, so I should have known that. Thank you, Aubrey. All right. Any other questions? And as always, feel free to send an email, and we will get an answer to you as soon as we can. Yes. All right. Well, if that is it, thank you all for attending.